I'm going to introduce very briefly our panelists and then get underway with our session. Let me ask, in the room now, how many of you are community college trustees? Raise your hands if you would. Okay.
Oh, good.
How many university regents or university trustees? Many fewer. Okay, fewer? Okay. All right. Good to know. So let me start with a story. We were talking about trust earlier in the ethics conversation, and Bobby mentioned that I was with a SUNY system for a number of years. And I was there as a secretary of the board when, and Bruce and I actually worked in the SUNY system at the same time for a couple of years. When there was a transition between the trustees for the SUNY system that had been appointed by Mario Cuomo, Cuomo won, his son Andrew now is governor, and George Pataki. So Mario Cuomo lost to George Pataki. George Pataki was, by New York standards, a conservative governor, probably about as conservative as they'd had in New York since Thomas Dewey. Nelson Rockefeller, was pretty liberal for a Republican. So at any rate, this was a big shift in the political landscape, and Mario Cuomo had not paid a lot of attention to seats on the board, so there were open seats, there were trustees serving beyond their time, and the new governor then could appoint people to the board quickly, and in that instance, the governor appointed the chair and the vice chair of the board as well. They were not elected by their peers. So pretty quickly, the new governor, George Pataki, his people were taking control, and I remember one public meeting of the board where one of the Cuomo appointees was kind of waxing eloquent about his contributions to SUNY over the years he'd been on the board. He was about to leave, and I could tell the new board chair, who was the Pataki appointee, was getting very anxious. I was sitting next to him, and he was kind of starting to wiggle in place, and finally he said, you don't need to tell us, this is public session, you don't need to tell us when you're leaving, Arnold. He said, we know the day, the hour, the minute, and the second that your term ends. So that wasn't necessarily a good way to build trust across the partisan lines. Well, let me start by briefly introducing our panelists. As I said, again, you'll know more about them if you want to look online at the good materials that Mary has supplied us with. So I'll start with Dr. Bruce Leslie, the Chancellor of the Alamo Colleges, and he started in that job on November 1st, 2006. He's chief executive overseeing 5 colleges. He's got an enrollment of about 160,000 credit and continuing education students each semester. And as a result of his leadership, the Alamo Colleges have received numerous state and national awards, including the Star Award, the National Bellwether Award, several sustainability and operational awards, and recognition as an Achieving the Dream Leader college. Prior to assuming this chancellorship, he served as chancellor of the Houston Community College System, chancellor of the Connecticut Community and Technical Colleges, and as president of Onondaga Community College in Syracuse, New York, and that is a community college in the SUNY system. He was named, closer to home, a distinguished alumnus of the University of Texas at Austin in 1990. Let me go now to Raymond Lewis, sitting here to my left. And he's chair of the Board of Regents at Galveston College and chair of the Community College Association of Texas Trustees. So Mr. Lewis earned his bachelor's degree at Huston-Tillotson University in Austin and completed his graduate education at the University of Houston Graduate School of Social Work. He recently retired, that's why he looks relaxed, after 35 years from the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, spending the last 25 years as Associate Dean in the School of Health Professions with direct responsibility for the Office of Admissions and the Office of Student Affairs. He served in many appointed leadership positions within the city of Galveston. And he also does some consulting work, providing consultation in organizational development now and group dynamics, as well as individual leadership coaching. And I mentioned his current position with the Galveston College Board and the Community College Association. So I'll jump down to Stuart Stedman at the end of the table over here, who is vice chair of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. He was appointed to a 3-year term on March 9th, 2016 by Governor Greg Abbott. Mr. Stedman is the president of Stedman West Interests, Inc., a family investment office. He serves on the advisory board of the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute and has been involved in wildlife research and conservation for many years. He's supported and designed numerous research projects focused on white-tailed deer. You would be a hero in Wisconsin, given the hunting culture there, and has written numerous articles on white-tailed deer management. He received the Texas Outdoorsman of the Year Award in 2009, the DAR Conservation Committee Award in 2012, and the Harvey Wheel Sportsman Conservationist of the Year Award in 2014. He also formerly served as a trustee of the Texas Children's Hospital and the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston when he's indoors. I guess he does that. So I want to thank, let's see, where's AK? AK Mago, to my right, because he is being gracious enough to substitute at the 11th hour for President Austin Lane of Texas Southern, who could not make it. So you know you've got a good player when they're willing to step right up at the 11th hour. So let me tell you quickly about him. AK of Dallas was appointed to the board of the University of North Texas System in November of 2015, and his term expires in May 2021. Regent Mago is chairman and CEO of Mago and Associates, Inc. He is the founding chairman of the Greater Dallas Indo-American Chamber, now known as the U.S.-India Chamber. In 2014, Regent Mago was awarded the Padma Shri, India's fourth highest civilian award, by the government of India for his services to trade and industry. So we have a very distinguished and varied group of panelists. I have, 3 questions for them. And again, we're going to try to keep this conversational. I've asked them to take no more than 4 minutes to address any one question. Not every panelist has to address every question at all or to the same length. And I'm going to try to pull the audience in as we go along. So if you hear something you want to reinforce or you have a question about or you roundly object to as our panelists are talking, stick your hand up and we'll get this audience involvement going as soon as we can. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end for a robust audience conversation as well. So let me start with this question. We've got a complex higher education landscape in Texas in many ways. So the dynamic of shared powers and responsibility among the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, system boards, institutional boards, system chief executives, and institution chief executives inevitably, I think, is a source of some tension in public university and college systems. So my question for my colleagues on the panel is, what do you do as a leader to help make the tension productive? And let me say, as a former system head myself, I think governors and legislators put systems and put coordinating boards in place in part, let's be frank, so that not every institution can do everything it wants to do. They want to have a level of coordination and control, fair or not, over their public education, public higher education investment. And the creation of systems and coordinating boards is a way of exercising that control to some extent over individual institutional ambitions. And the question is, how do you do that in a way that doesn't stifle those ambitions, that encourages it, but at the same time makes for really good expenditure of state tax dollars and efficient operation of those systems? But you have that tension, you have that rub. So Chancellor Leslie's had that tension and rub in a number of different systems over a long and distinguished career, and let me ask him to start by addressing that question.
Thank you, Kevin. I want to introduce you to Dr. Yvonne Katz, my board chair. She's playing tag team with Roberto. He had to leave. So Yvonne's here, so if you haven't had a chance to meet her, I want to encourage you to do so. At Alamo, we have several principles that I think are working really well for us. The foundation is what we call principle-centered leadership, and it's based on Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's all about how do we create leadership throughout the system. We don't use the term shared governance anymore. We use participatory leadership, because shared governance typically addresses itself to a perception that that's for faculty only and not for students and employees and members of our community, particularly employers. It's not for university colleagues or school district superintendents and all others. So we've broadened that whole concept out to say we need everybody to be involved in the process. So in some ways, we've extended that tension a bit, I guess. But we find that it's been enormously healthy for us if it's managed. And I think that's the key. And so the board is very attentive to that concept. They developed a model that we call Alamo Engage, and it's really all about focusing on how do we extend that engagement into those sectors that I just mentioned earlier. We've just now are rolling out a new model for faculty involvement that we spent the last couple of years developing very deliberately, and so that we have a better way of managing how faculty are involved. So it's not just about saying no to everything, but they're actually actively engaged in helping us figure out proactively, one of the 7 habits, being proactive, to make sure that the issues that we're addressing are fully vetted and communicated, and that hopefully we're going to be generally on the same page. The second thing is the board is very active in the right way. They are involved in workshops and conferences. As you know, Roberto was chair of the ACCT Board of Trustees. We've never had that level of leadership from the Alamo colleges in the past. That has brought a huge level of recognition and acknowledgement to the work that my board does. And my other trustees, Dr. Katz being certainly one of them, has been very, very active. So they're going out, they're learning about best practices, they're coming back, and we're talking and engaging. Are these the right things for us? If so, how do we go about engaging them? The third thing is involving students more. We have a student trustee. We're the only community college in the state of Texas. You've heard me say this before with much pride. We're actually into our 3rd year, 3rd student trustee, and they've all been phenomenal. It's really adding a great enhancement to our consideration of the issues that we want to deal with. We just adopted a new strategy around tuition, and the student trustee took some leadership and engaged student government. They did some surveying, whatever, and came back and gave us their recommendation. So I think those principles are what's helping us manage that tension in a very productive way.
Thanks, Bruce. Mr. Lewis, let me go to you. You've got the perspective about what's tense at Galveston College and then what's tense across the community college sector in Texas in your association work. How do you work together with all the different forces in the state to make sure your own college and the community colleges in general are tacking with that tension and headwind forward?
You're adding things that's not in this question that we had here.
Just paraphrasing.
By the way, our president is here, so if he doesn't seem tense, then that must mean we're doing what we're supposed to be doing.
There you go.
Dr. Miles Shelton is here. First, as the difference that I think provides a great deal of tension in our relationship, as the chancellor probably knows very well, is that we as trustees are elected. Unlike the regents for the system or the coordinating board members who are appointed, we are all elected. And I often say that that's a good thing and it's a bad thing that we are elected. We have, in fact, one employee, which is the CEO or chancellor in some cases. We don't, and which is probably where it comes from a lot of attention around the state, is when we don't recognize that certainly can bring about a great deal of tensions, and we've heard many stories about that. We've got complete responsibility, fiduciary responsibility for our budget, and we have to sign everything that over a certain amount. We're responsible for our local expenditure of tax dollars that comes to our college, and that's a big responsibility, I assure you. We can raise those taxes up to a certain level, but after a certain level, we as trustees all over the state have to go back to our community to ask them and convince them to believe in whatever project is coming for the college, for them to vote for those to tax themselves more. We do share powers. We don't necessarily share the same level of authority, and I'd like to make a distinction there in those two. Our authority comes from the state of Texas. We have no authority for anyone below the level of president. And that, of course, brings about a great deal of tension. At any point, there are 9 members of our board At any point, any 5 members can wake up any day and decide that they're going to get rid of our or your chief executive officer. Any majority could do that to make the president's life very, very uncomfortable, and that has happened in the state.
Your president is starting to look tense to me now. He wasn't earlier, but...
I think most presidents sitting in those positions, as a chancellor probably can tell you, that they are very much aware of those tensions. But of course, the tensions there that you describe can be constructive, and it can be very destructive, as some of you very, very well. What do? As chair, I try to make a concerted effort to set the tone for my board, for the folks, and make sure that what I do, hopefully, we've got a good enough relationship with each other that that I don't go down to the dean and say, wait a minute, what's going over here? I think you need to fix those lights in there. If I'm doing things like that, that immediately begins a tension between my CEO and the rest of the board. And if that happens at any community college board, that's where a great deal of tension will happen. One ways in which we try to do that, any board can do that, is try to provide very clear expectations to the chief executive officer or the chancellor, and setting parameters within which they can work so that they know how far they can go, left or right, east or west. And I think that's very important, and to evaluate clearly. Make sure that you're doing evaluation every year. Boards don't always have to agree, but it's imperative that after consensus, full support of whatever the issue is necessary going forward. I mean, there's inherent tension between and among the players, and that you've already outlined. And although you left out the tension that our legislative throws into this mix, sure, we have to certainly consider that. We all have competing and markedly different priorities, and but both spoken, and when we've got some unspoken priorities. I'll leave it there, and we can talk about a lot of those things differently.
And when you say we have different priorities, you mean among your board members? Or board members, staff, both?
Well, thank you for asking about that. Yeah. I think each of the entities that we described, the legislature, various boards, the institutions, sometimes a board's priorities can be very different than the institution's board. Sometimes individual members, sure, of any board can be very different than what the issues are that they are there to serve. Mm-hmm. So, and that's what I mean about that, and we can talk a bit more about that. Thank you.
Well, let me jump to Mr. Stuart Stedman, who's the vice chair of the coordinating board, the big umbrella board that looks out over this complicated landscape and lots of moving parts besides the white-tailed deer out there, Stuart, moving around. How do you see this issue? And it's big and variegated a landscape of institutions and systems as you have. How do you see your board, the coordinating board, exercising your own authority in a way that that makes use of that tension positively, and also maybe talk a little bit about what I think we talked about in our phone call preparing for this panel at least one time, the difference perhaps between authority and influence and how boards can use both adeptly.
Right. Well, it's a little bit different, this leadership deal with the coordinating board, and I've only been on since April of this year, so it's not like I have this huge depth of experience, but, you know, I've gotten kind of familiar with it. I think I understand what it does and some of the issues and some of the limitations. But it's different. It's different than a community college system. It's different than a university system. I mean, it really sets broad goals for higher education. It has a data gathering and analysis function. You heard a little bit about that at lunch. And as I kind of distilled it down, you know, we're talking about David Gardner, it's kind of a think tank. You know, it looks at the data, looks at the landscape of higher education, and tries to come up with ways to make, you know, higher education better in a number of different areas. In theory, I mean, its charge is to coordinate, you know, higher education across the state of Texas and to allocate resources effectively and efficiently. But the reality is it has a lot of influence, but very limited power. The most common tension, I think, and this is, again, I don't have the real perspective that, you know, say Bobby Jenkins would have, but you know, really these systems tend to want to, and the university systems in particular, but I presume community college systems, want to expand and get bigger. And I think that there's that natural kind of impetus to grow, which is good, and I think there's also this natural competition between systems, which is probably to some extent healthy. And the coordinating board is supposed to kind of regulate and monitor all of that. But really, its primary, if not sole power, is you know, statutory power is regulating or approving degree programs. And that's significant. I mean, it gives us a seat at the table as these tensions sort of develop. But there's a lot we can't do. But what we can do is we have the data, and we have these very, very smart people that look at the data. And so people listen to us. And especially the legislature listens to us. And if the legislature listens to us, the systems listen to us. So that's where we have influence and you know, even though we have limited power. So that's pretty much kind of my perspective on the tension. The tension becomes, you know, sort of all across the landscape of higher education in Texas, and we're kind of in the middle of it, sort of being a referee to the best we can.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to go to AK in a second here. Before I do, let me say after he has his say, well, I'll see if any of you have thoughts on this particular question, so get the conversation going two ways from here out and back to the audience. The word, Stuart, I was thinking of when you were talking about the coordinating board's role and cooperation, competition, is co-opetition, because I think that's what happens in a way between our higher education institutions if there is a healthy tension. They're competing with each other at some level, and they're cooperating in other ways. And I think the trick for all the boards overseeing the institutions and the system and the entire state is how do you get that balance straight in the interests of the people who support the institutions, in the interests of the people who attend them and work with them. Well, AK, so you're on the board of the University of North Texas system, and I was just happened to be at their offices last week. I mentioned, and I know they're in a growing city, in a place where they've got some growth going on in one or two of their institutions. How do you see this issue of tension? You've got, what, 6 institutions or so in the system, and then you've got the coordinating board, and you've got lots of things to contend with in Dallas, the Cowboys and other things. So how do you balance all that?
Well, Kevin Mary told me, AK, you don't have to say anything. Just say you agree with the other 3 panelists, and then Kevin will move on to the next question. So, but anyway, I think I will go ahead and say a few words. I'm just a new regent, have been there just 1 year. And so I am observing, trying to learn from others who have been there much longer. And I think the approach we are taking there is that all of us are here for one purpose and one purpose alone, that is to provide the best education to these students that we have at the lowest possible cost. I think if we can provide those 2 things, everything else takes care of it itself. I believe in the philosophy of hiring a great CEO and then let that CEO do the job. Provide the CEO some guidelines, provide them the guidance. Ask them if they ever need your help to call you. It's like, unless you see something which you feel like you need to call the CEO, that you are not going according to the guidelines we have provided you or the policies we have set up. That means either you didn't make the right choice when you hired the person, and if it gets to a situation where you feel you have to hire a new one. But otherwise, just stay in your own boundary lines that you have. And my wife reminds me of that all the time. Don't step into my area. Just bring the money and I will spend. So I think, to me, the biggest concern is when I hear this graduation period of 6 years, 5 years. I believe in completing your education in 4 years, and if possible, even do it in 3 years. Because I have suggested let's give incentive to students who can finish it in 3 years. The one who does in 4 years, give them a discounted rate. The one who wants to do in 6 years, charge them more money. Maybe they will change. But I think if you respect each other, there will not be any tension. If you treat others in a respectful way, let them do their job instead of interfering all the time, calling the deans or calling the faculty members or micromanaging. That's not a good thing. And in case of our board, as far as I have observed, we don't do those things. And so we are sending a good message. We started a new campus in city of Frisco, which is growing like crazy. And one perspective which I bring to the board is that of getting more foreign students at UNT. Because in comparison to UT Arlington, UT Austin, UTD, we don't have our share of foreign students. What that does is helps you get more money, because you are charging them foreign student fee, and also your academic records go up because most of them are very smart kids. When they come from other countries, they have only one mission, and that mission is to finish their education as quickly as possible. So I think as far as, I don't know what's going on at other boards and other campuses, but at UNT we are doing pretty good.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, you filled in that nothing to say very nicely. I figured, I knew you would. I knew you'd be able to do that. AK brought up one issue that maybe some of you would be interested in talking about later. It's kind of a rising discussion in higher ed that boards are involved in, is the non-traditional president or chancellor versus the traditional president or chancellor. You at North Texas have a non-traditional
We have.
chancellor in Lee Jackson, the president at the University of Texas system now, Admiral McRaven, certainly a non-traditional head of the system, and how skills from outside the academy can play in those jobs and how sometimes they don't. We've got interesting examples of people being very successful and some not so successful. But that's that's another topic we can take up in a bit if we want to. But any reactions or questions to what's been said on this issue of the tensions across your complex, variegated landscape? Anybody want to jump in with any anecdotes from your own institution or system about some of these tensions and how they've played out and what the board's role has been?
Maybe too much tension.
I was going to, no, there's a brave tension speaker there. Yes, sir. And you could tell us who you are and where you're from, if you would.
I'm Phil Ritter with the Dallas County Community College District, and sometimes tension creates opportunities for innovation, and I'm wondering, maybe for Stuart, do you see cross-system collaboration evolving in effective ways in certain areas, and what are they, and how can we encourage more of that?
I don't have a lot of perspective, although I saw it at our board meeting last week, and it surprised me that there was competition. It's a Freudian slip. There was cooperation between the A&M system and one of the institutions in the UT system, and it was like, whoa, that's kind of the way it should work. Where each takes a particular strength and delivers that to a particular community, in this case, McAllen. I guess I don't have the answer. I think it's just because, people and systems want to expand. They want to do well, I think on balance it's positive. But what the coordinating board is supposed to do is when resources are clearly duplicative, we're supposed to step in and kind of say, wait, anyway, does that answer your question? I mean, because in general, and I don't have really that experience and perspective to answer, but my impression is that it's largely positive, and it's absolutely wonderful when institutions actually get together and sort of carve out little niches that they're their specialty.
Anybody else on the panel want to address that question or issue? Anybody? All right, I'll just say one thing quickly, and then we'll move on to the second question. So, and we talked a little bit about this in Regent sessions this morning. Our students, in a way, are leading the charge in what I'll call cross-institutional partnerships. What do I mean? Well, what we know, based on the data, is that many more students now, when they get to a degree, have credits from more than one institution. It's not like the old days when many of us would go and stay for 2 years or stay for 4 years at the same place, right? And so that's going to, I think, only continue to expand. And the more it does, the more it will be necessary for the institutions to be cooperating with each other, not only on transfer policies, certainly there, but on other matters that students will, I think, say, well, I had this at College X, I'm taking courses from College Y now, and they don't have this. Why not? Or I really didn't like the policy at College X, and College Y is really a lot better. All of the community colleges in the state ought to be doing what College Y is. And then those students go on to grow up, get jobs, and get elected to the legislature, and they come back and tell us you really ought to be cooperating in these ways, right? All right, second question. What messages do you send as leaders to your employees and to your colleagues about this productive tension, both in terms of your relations with the individuals you work with as leaders and in terms of the issues you're responsible for addressing in your roles as leaders, the big issues like degree completion, like student debt, like program duplication, like academic quality? What messages do you send to your employees and colleagues about the tension around those kinds of issues, and what feedback do you get, if any, from them when you send those messages? And we can start with whoever wants to jump in first now.
I'll start.
Bruce?
So, the educational, particularly higher ed environment is quite dynamic, and there's a long tradition of people watching the board and the CEO and how they work together. Part of that group is grateful when they collaborate and things move, and the other part of the group is looking for that tension to explode into the CEO being forced out. It's there all the time. One of the things that a board really needs to do, and I appreciated Mr. Gomez's point made several times about the body corporate and other comments, that often trustees come to the table with their own agenda, not necessarily the college's agenda. There's an old adage that the board that didn't hire you is the board that fires you. In other words, the board that hired you keeps you because they love you, right? But as they change, particularly in elected boards, and cycle through, the new people come in often with another agenda. Sometimes they were elected by folks who were out to get you. So that level of dynamic is very, very powerful in higher education. I think maybe perhaps more so at community colleges, again, because of the elected nature of the boards. So the more that a board can control the tendency for some people to be there for political reasons, running for city council and running for state legislature, as opposed to their service for the college, the more likely that college is going to make progress. And there's research out there, and we can just see it, those of us in the field can see it ourselves. Those systems that have long-standing CEOs, Dallas is a perfect example, lots of long-standing chancellors, great leaders who stayed a long time, Maricopa, Miami-Dade, or others, Valencia, or others. We can see the kind of progress that they are making. When board members, almost like we see this in ISDs all the time in Texas, right? Superintendent, what is it, average tenures 3 years? And we kind of accept that. Well, community college tenure is about 5 years. We shouldn't accept that, because that holds off the ability for the institution to progress. If you have a real issue with CEO, you need to deal with it. But not to threaten publicly to throw him out or her out every time you show up at a board meeting. And I had that situation in Houston. So not just with me, but 3 of my predecessors and successors. So it's a culture that only the board can really control. And the board needs to be held accountable to maintaining the right culture, and that means the board chair and the corporate council and others, including the community. At one point in Houston, the Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Houston Partnership, attended every meeting to kind of manage the way the board was behaving. That was before I got there. So my point is that the best interests of the institution are achieved through reducing that tension, managing whatever issues you have in the proper way, in the proper channels, and not trying to replace the CEO just because you're a new trustee and you came with a different agenda. It's got to be about the agenda of that institution and what's best for it.
Can I step in there as a trustee after Dr. Leslie, because I very much remember, I live in Galveston, therefore I very much remember all of those things going on. Since trustees are elected officials, as I have mentioned, it seems that it's very difficult for a board to somehow get control of someone who comes with a constituency and comes to the board with supposedly, for lack of a better word, an axe to grind. Unfortunately, Dr. Leslie, I know an example of a board who in fact hired a president, and that board got rid of that president because they ended up with that majority and they simply forced that president to resign. And here again, if there's anything we as trustees have to do as boards, is somehow get our culture such that our objective is to get students in. That was part of your question there. Mm-hmm. Get students in, get students graduated, and get students into jobs. And when we get elected to these positions and lose sight of that, then somebody should force us to go and do something else. But unfortunately, we are elected, and we're there for 6 years without any egregious kinds of activities. But our boards have to set a tone. We have to set a tone. A little bit about some other tension that comes to institutions, and I want to say that I was part of the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston when the closing the gaps was formed, and I was working in my role as a dean in a school, so I recognize that tension. Right. And I feel that same bit of tension now that comes from the coordinating board with the new 60 by 30. And I don't think I would have thought about it as tension without having participated on your panel. But there's a certain amount of tension that comes there. That's a bold, as it should be, it's a bold step to have all of these things Dr. Paredes and his group wants us to accomplish by 2030. That's tremendous. And Dr. Paredes didn't bring any checks with him also. So there's a certain amount of tension there. And you have to think in terms of what part all of these interlocking agencies, the coordinating board, the Texas Education Commission, the boards of our institutions, all of us interlock together with the legislator in order to make sure those companies, and make sure that that agenda is accomplished that the coordinating board has so well put forward to us, and it's wonderful. But we got to recognize those tensions as you're suggesting that we do in order to get those things accomplished. And this is where, as some people are saying, that's where the productive tension comes about as we grapple with trying to find a solution to get there by 2030.
Well, I'm just glad, Raymond, that you are feeling the tension and the pressure, because it's a serious and very real goal. And you know, part of I think what the coordinating board does, I mean, we don't lobby, but we have position papers, we educate, and of course, you know, we hope to, you know, persuade, you know, the people that spend taxpayer money that this is a very important, critical need for the state, and so that maybe they will provide you with those resources to get that done.
And I think that, you know, if you look around the country, the more you can show that you are cooperating to do it, the more likelihood that you get those resources finally. Anybody else? Hey, Kay, did you want to jump in here?
Well, since the regents are appointed, so we have a little, I guess, easier situation than the elected trustees for the community colleges. I think we don't have to answer to our constituency, just like you guys have to. But at the same time, I think I just go back to that whether you are elected or you are appointed, as long as the goal and mission is to get those kids finish their associate degree or degree at the earliest possible, at the lowest cost, and don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about your ego. Don't think you are any better than your president or your chancellor or dean or anybody. So I think I should go ahead and acknowledge one of our president, Bob Mong. Is president of the Dallas campus of UNT. And he didn't come through academia. His background is in publishing and newspaper. So as you mentioned, and even our chancellor, Lee Jackson. So maybe it's not bad to look outside to hire your president and chancellors and not limit yourself just to those who have been teaching and forever. I have I have great admiration for teachers. They go through a lot and don't get paid as much as they should. They can make more money outside if they do something else. But I was telling someone that I have not read this much material even to get my MBA, as I have to read in the last 12 months, being a regent. So, and it doesn't pay anything except you get a free lunch when you have a board meeting. Go
All
ahead,
right,
Kevin.
thank you. Any reactions from the audience here? I was thinking of, yes, sir. And tell us who you are again and where you're from.
John Hanson, Houston Community College trustee.
John Hanson, Houston Community College trustee.
Oh, okay, here we go again.
Good.
I would tend to agree with the observation that I've heard from several people up at the table, that the elected boards tend to more easily become polarized against the CEO. And as I've watched the process now from the inside, I have a hypothesis that the problem is, in fact, with the election process, that when you need to be able to build a case as to why you should get reelected, you want to be able to stand out. It's very difficult to stand out when you're working as part of a team. When you go back to your electorate and say, well, the whole college has improved, and so I want credit for that. And your opponents say, well, how do we know you had anything to do with it? The people that can most easily show an individual impact are the people who are basically the negative people, the ones who basically want to pull the pin on the grenade and toss it into the process and see how much fun they can generate. There are always voters willing to support that because they're essentially negative themselves. And I would put forth a hypothesis, and I don't say this in the sense that I don't think you can overcome it. I believe you can. But that I think the process, in a way, is biased in favor of the negative people when you have an elective process.
How do you overcome it, in your opinion?
Well, I had a lot of experience previous to the college on a K-12 board where I think we succeeded in doing that. And you do it by, number one, building relationships with your fellow board members. But number two, as was suggested in an earlier presentation today, you have to be willing to take your colleagues out behind the woodshed and slap them upside the head with a 2x4 when their behavior gets too far out of line. And that's never pleasant because these are people that you're trying to work with. But if you're really focused on the well-being of the institution or the organization, as you should be, you can't let those sorts of personal attitudes get in your way. You've got to be able to say as a group, you are interfering with our ability to make good progress, and we can't let you do that.
Yeah.
And if it comes down to it, we'll see to it that you aren't back here for a next term.
All right,
And that tends to get people's attention.
real problems.
Obviously, when you're on an appointed board, you're serving a single master.
The institution, right?
Well, it should be the institution, but you probably, if you don't care about being reappointed, then yes, you're
Right.
truly independent.
Right.
And I think even in an elected position, to maintain your integrity, you've really got to go into it with the attitude that I would like to be here for a while, but if the price of staying here is that I have to harm the institution, then it would be better to do the right thing and go find something else to do with my free time
Well
when
said.
this term is over.
Well said. Anybody want to react on the panel?
Well, it's subjective, you know.
I'll come back.
If I recognize that I'm doing harm to the university, that's excellent statement, but it's subjective. What I think is harming may not be what someone else thinks is harming. What I think is helpful may not be what someone else thinks is helpful. And that seems to be how some of us trustees get ourselves in trouble because we have a vision of helping that's not very constructive at all. But somehow in the back of our head, we think we're being constructive, and perhaps it's being individually constructive rather than institutionally constructive.
I appreciate your point. And I wanted to say, when I was there, it wasn't politically possible, but once I left, the board sanctioned one of its members publicly, I think twice, because behavior didn't stop. But the challenge that the trustees have is that there is no legal recourse. It has to be done, like you said, in the woodshed, or it has to be done by other members of the public, and that's where the Greater Houston Partnership was trying to play a part earlier. But you're absolutely right. The board, when it does nothing, it just allows that behavior to continue, and not just by one, but in some cases by others. So I want to compliment the HCC board for having done that. And that person is no longer on the board. Should have never been there in the first place. Yeah.
All right, last question, and this goes to a corporate analogy. And out of the newspaper business, you may have some feel for this. The CEO of a major corporate conglomerate once said that if he tells his company heads what to do 20 times a year, the good ones leave. If he never tells them what they have to do, the conglomerate starts to fracture into competing factions that don't deliver full value to its shareholders. So does this view of organizational relationships apply to the Texas higher education landscape at all? And if not, why not? And if so, how? And I can tell you that the corporate leader who said that, and it's a paraphrase, but it was Jeff Immelt, the CEO of General Electric.
I guess should say just for 5 times instead of 20.
5, just 5. Yeah, maybe that's better.
No, it's again, I think each situation will be different. You will have CEOs which need not to be reminded. Then you will have some, they have to be reminded. So you just have to see what's good for the institution. Is this the person, by reminding, will change? And are we just badgering him and trying to push him out?
So I think one of the best things that we did when I arrived, I can't believe it's been 10 years now since I left Houston. But when I arrived, within a month of my arrival, the board and I had a 3-day retreat, and we developed a set of charges to me. And now initially they were between us, and that was part of my evaluation, and I would report back to the board. Some years later, I decided actually, let me publish them. Let's make them public. Let everybody see them. And the board kept saying, you know, when you get pushback, remind everybody that this is coming from the board. So we began publishing them. They make up my evaluation. So the charges to the chancellor are well known by everybody. They're on the website. Anybody can go see them. When I hire presidents, that's part of the contract, if you will, we make, the compact we make. Your support of the board's policies, your support of these charges. Otherwise, this isn't the right place for you to be. So that has worked really, really well for me in terms of my leadership team. And the board talks about them all the time, and I'm held accountable to them, and I get graded on them as part of my evaluation. And each year we re-evaluate, we revise, we might add one, we might take one away, whatever, but they're very clear and very precise. And that, as I say, was the first, and I recommend this to my colleagues, particularly those who are moving into a new position, whether for the first time or they're a president moving on to another role. That's the first thing y'all should do. So I recommend that to trustees too. Sit down with your CEO, have that conversation, make sure you're all on the same page. Then you have less chance for the rogue element to play another aspect to this thing, because you all know where you're going. And then as the board changes, in a sense, they have to either sign on to it or not. And each year, every member of the board signs it. This is our affirmation that these are the charges that we give this chancellor. So that's worked really, really well for us.
Good practice. Yeah. Anybody else on this one? Where are we? Stuart, you look like you want to say something?
It almost doesn't apply. I mean, it does, but I don't have the experience. We haven't been through an evaluation of the commissioner, but I can just say that whatever he does, however many times he tells his deputy commissioners and staff to do whatever. It's about right, because we have just excellent people top to bottom, and the more I'm exposed to it, the more I realize that it's a really special place at the coordinating board. So that's obviously the commissioner, but from a management standpoint, the board, if it ain't broke, we're not really worried about it. So it's functioning very well.
Well, good. And I think that's a nice place to leave it. Let me say one concluding thought, and then I'll turn it back over to Mary, because I think our time is up. Mary, is it? So I just wanted to say to all of you, and I said it to the folks from the university side this morning, thank you for the work that you do as trustees, and certainly my colleagues who are still in the trenches as administrators. And we know that people who get a post-secondary credential have higher salaries on average, have better health on average, are more philanthropic, volunteer more, vote more often, have less contact with the criminal justice system, have less contact with the social service system. It's not that people who don't have post-secondary degrees or credentials are bad people, not at all. It's just testament to the value of what you all do. We're in the enabling profession, the human development profession, and it's noble work. And the unique American still experiment, really, of having lay governance of our higher education institutions and systems has worked, and I think continues to work for us, but it only works if we get good, responsible people on our boards, engaging in governance in the way this session and the session tomorrow, both days will help you to do those wonderful jobs that you've taken on, again, at high pay and with wonderful recognition. So I thank you, all of you, for doing that, and it's been fun to be with you. And I want to thank our panel, and hope you will too. Stuart, Raymond, AK, and Bruce, thank you all.